Hello everyone! Today I'm joined by Dave Kee, a very talented filmmaker and musician from our community. Dave, how did you discover your passion for filmmaking?
Through music. Originally I'm a composer and I love movies, and I never knew anything about photography or cinematography. But I think like a lot of us, you sort of know it because you've lived in the era of movies for so long that I discovered it while watching Goodfellas, actually, and with a friend who was a filmmaker, and he started pointing out moves, and that's how I got into it. Suddenly realizing that what the camera moves is. I actually didn't get into filmmaking via writing, which may have been better, but I didn't write since I was a kid. You know, I did music since I was a little kid, so it wasn't really an option. So I got into it through photography, cinematography. It's like music because you have something that happens and then something else that happens, and it's very similar. Yeah, they move through and there's a larger structure. And that's kind of how it happened. In college, I had a professor, Alvin Brem, who was a bass player and a composer, and he used to say, and this was probably predating by 15 years me having any interest in actually making a video or a film, and I remember him saying, like, yeah, it's the only other form of art that is like musical composition, in that you have the movement of things through time.
What was the most challenging project that you worked on?
I did a lot of little videos, just whatevers, going out there and doing whatever, going out with two buddies to the park, and they say, so what are we going to shoot? I was like, I don't know, figure something out, and just doing it with the little knowledge that we had, and then putting it all together and following through. You get to the point where you have, I guess, a rough cut, where in that time I was just sort of like, God, this is all I can get out of this. Damn, should have done this, should have done that. Maybe just give up, because this is not working out at all. But that's where a certain attitude, which I picked up in yoga, actually, which is sort of like you can do something with 100% of your being and demand 100% of whatever you can do at that moment, and try not to be too attached to the final product without not caring. It's a trick. I would get to the end of a project and I would watch it with friends, and I was actually looking forward to the things that were really good, that I meant that worked out, and other things that were really good, I was like, well, that was a mistake, but it was a happy mistake. It's all a part of learning. So I actually look forward to the things that really don't work very well, as much as I do to the good things. That's my philosophy.
What was the best example of a happy mistake that you made?
First serious effort at making a short film was called Cold Wake Up. Had a very loose idea that I was going to have a guy who was imprisoned by it was a dystopian sort of situation, and the entire film was so kind of stereotypical of the filmmaker who's come up with this first dystopian short film. So I kind of went with that. I took that out of music, because it's like when a jazz player wants to make something up, like that's what he wants to do, and his finger slips. He's like, and I come from classical music mostly, so you'd work on it till you got it right. But the jazz guy says, all right, so the whole thing, before you know it, it's going to be based on this, and you've got a whole huge, beautiful new tune that's based on a mistake, essentially. That's what that first film was pretty much all about. It can be a guy who gets out of prison, and then it turns out he was sort of in his mind, and it was sort of just tongue-in-cheek. In that movie, there were certain editing cuts that I had made a mistake with matching them. They should have been matched up spatially. They weren't, but it happened to work in a mood where there was a canted angle by accident, because I was too busy doing everything. It was like a one-man band, and working many hours with volunteer actors, and oh shit, I had a canted angle because it was a mistake, but happened to work out because of the mood of the character at that moment, stuff like that. Other things that were accidents that add some music and edit it, and it becomes a new thing that it wasn't supposed to be.
What projects are you currently working on?
I just finished making a short film with my iPhone because I just wanted to make something with the phone. You can't do anything manually with the phone. Everything is automatic. It's sort of locked in that way. And I just decided to go with it. And it was fun to have a tiny little camera where you go. And it was about the mind. I have songs that I've written. A song called It Was Nice. And it's about a guy who is fantasizing about dating a woman who's sort of a movie star. And but the thing is that even his fantasy, she doesn't like him in the fantasy either, so it's sort of funny. She kind of blows him off in the fantasy. That's, I think, probably what I'm headed for next.
I wouldn't want to be that guy.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. It was kind of a silly song, and then I was looking at it and I started to see some possibilities. And I talked to the same actor who was in my film Abigail's Dawning, Karen Zeri, and she thought it was a great idea, and she's going to be in that. I think it'll be pretty funny. Trying to compose music to take an event in time and then connect it to another event, which is related to it, contrasts to it, and then through time, there's the larger architecture to the music. That's a lot like film. That's what they have in common for me. Of course, there's the story, which is sort of literally a story in film, whereas in music, there's a story, like with classical music, it's a certain type of system of tonality, or if it's atonal, that has its own sort of system. Rock music, all music has a sort of a system to it that sort of makes a larger architecture, so it makes sense. It's not just event after event randomly. That's what they have in common for me. That's why it makes sense to me that I went from music to cinema, an interest in cinema.
Let's talk about the future. What are the future projects that you plan to work on?
I was actually working, I know it's going to sound strange, in October of 2022. Before the pandemic, I was working on a short film about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so, it's kind of a good time for that to happen, but there's so much work to do on it. Hopefully we'll all be around long enough to do that. But it was about, actually, specifically, I mentioned before my professor of composition, musical composition at Purchase College, where I went to school, Alvin Brem. His story from the Cuban Missile Crisis is the film. I even talked to his widow because he passed away. Got her permission to use the story. World War II, what are the guys who jump out of airplanes? Those guys. He was doing that over Europe. And then after, in 1962, he was with an orchestra. It was a part of a larger program that John Kennedy administration had with the Soviet Union of a cultural exchange, trying to bridge gaps, and make friendships, even as there was a Cold War with the leaders. And so they happened to go over to do Dona Nobis Pacem from the Mass in B minor by Bach in Moscow. And of course, in those days, we didn't have the communications where everyone knows everything immediately. So they were on the airplane when the whole thing happened between Khrushchev and Kennedy, and the standoff became, I think it was a day later. So the governments took them when they got to the airport in Moscow, took them into a room, the orchestra, and they told them, this is what's happening while you were in the air. And well, what do we do? I mean, we're here to play. We're not involved in politics, but I guess we're involved. And they decided we're going to play. And then came, I think it was a Saturday, when John Kennedy brought to the attendee, he had a press conference. It was just him on the screen telling everybody this is what's happening. And that was like, that weekend was the big standoff. And that's when the concert was happening. They decided to go and do the concert, and they finished Dona Nobis Pacem, Give Us Peace, And he said it was absolutely silent in the hall. A hall filled with Russians, Soviet citizens watching music of an American orchestra. And I believe the choir was Russian. And in fact, it was such a long silence that people figured, all right, I guess everyone's enemies. That's how they feel right now. They don't want to clap. And people started getting up and leaving in the orchestra. And then they started clapping thunderous applause, crying. And the way he told me was like, in that moment, nobody gave a damn in that building if the nukes all exploded everybody. It was humans, and that was it. So that really inspired me, that whole story. So I made a little film about it and actually wrote the screenplay. And then COVID-19 came. But hopefully soon, that'll be the next film that I'm working on.
At the end of the day, we are all humans. This is a very good plot, and I believe it has a lot of potential for exposure because the current political context is a bit similar to the one back then. It's not the same, but it's similar.
Yeah, it's a bit similar, yeah. And it's the kind of story that lends itself well. I wouldn't make like a Michael Moore type of movie to make a statement. I would make it as a piece of fiction about this character and his feelings, going into it. Who knows what people would read into it if it actually had been finished like this week. I think it's going to be a good one to make. I've got the music already. I even licensed the music from a recording, but I just haven't had a chance to do any work on it, the pandemic.
What advice would you give to those who are just starting?
Follow through, and what I was saying before about the attitude, that's really everything. Don't suffer overly. Some people, where I come from at least, they haven't, if you don't feel that you're ready to commit suicide, if you don't, get everything you want, that kind of attitude, kind of silly. 100%, but always try to remain a bit detached to I would celebrate the things that don't work. It's easy for me to say because I don't do it for a living. I don't do it under pressure of any types of, selling or anything like that. And of course, that's a huge pressure. But if you're just doing it as an artist, and I think I'm a beginner, with that attitude brings you further in your progress. And just get out and shoot. Somebody told me that. Get out and shoot and edit the hell out of everything and have fun with it. And I saw recently, I think Martin Scorsese has a master class, and I only saw the ad for it, and he was saying, when you get your rough cut, if you don't feel physically ill, there might be something wrong. And he was right. Like when I was really working hard on something and I got that finally, what ended up being 5 times longer than what it would be, yeah, it's tough. You have to follow through at that point, and that's where that attitude comes in. I love watching stuff that I did before and seeing that one thing that I knew I worked hard on. I had a funny one where I had 2 characters in prison, and one turns to the other and says, maybe you're an informant, maybe you're working for the state, maybe you're a plant. And I wrote the other guy to say, plant? Yeah, I'm a plant. I'm a potted plant. And I remember writing it, I was like, well, that's so clever. And then we had them say it, and I was like, oh my God, that sucks. And so I took everything out except for his initial, and that was perfect. So those kinds of things I think they're hilarious. I have a friend, we had a punk band when we were in 9th grade called Entropy. And he, you know how punk bands are, really like self-important, really important. And now 35 years later, he can't even talk about it without turning bright red and saying, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. But I think it's great. And you can get into the thing that you're really interested in, which is the cinema.
Dave, thank you very much for your time and for sharing your knowledge with our community.
Thank you. Take care.